Imagine living in a world where the studio could decide what movie you made, what clothes you wore, who you dated, and sometimes even what the public was supposed to believe about your private life. That was old Hollywood. Behind the glamorous premieres, expensive gowns, studio backlots, and screaming fans was a powerful publicity machine. Actors were not simply actors, they were brands. Their faces sold movie tickets, their romances sold magazines, and their personal lives could become part of the marketing strategy. But here is where the story gets complicated. You may have heard that certain Hollywood stars married their co-stars purely for publicity. Some of those stories are supported by historical evidence. Others are based on rumors that grew bigger with every passing decade. And some couples really did fall in love, while the studios simply took advantage of the publicity. So today, we are going behind the curtain and looking at 12 famous Hollywood marriages and relationships connected to the movies. And before we begin, one important warning: not every couple on this list was proven to have married as a publicity stunt. Hollywood history is full of rumors, memoirs, conflicting accounts, and stories that changed depending on who was telling them. So rather than repeating gossip as fact, we are going to separate what is documented from what is merely alleged. And number 12 may surprise you, because the marriage became one of the most famous examples of Hollywood romance being turned into a public spectacle. Let's begin. Number 12. Lana Turner and Artie Shaw. Lana Turner was already becoming one of Hollywood's most recognizable young stars when she became involved with bandleader Artie Shaw. The two had appeared together in the 1940 film Dancing Co-Ed, and their romance quickly became a major story. Turner was known as one of MGM's glamorous young stars, while Shaw was a famous bandleader with his own celebrity following. Their decision to elope to Las Vegas in 1940 created enormous publicity. And here's the fascinating part: the marriage lasted only about 4 months. Turner later described Shaw as intelligent but difficult, and their relationship became another chapter in her extraordinary romantic history. Was it deliberately arranged by MGM as a publicity marriage? There is no solid evidence proving that. But the marriage certainly generated publicity at exactly the kind of moment when Hollywood studios understood the commercial value of a star's personal life. The public loved the idea of two celebrities falling in love. The newspapers loved it even more. And MGM certainly had a reason to keep Lana Turner's name in the headlines. The lesson here is important. A marriage did not have to be fake to become useful publicity. Sometimes Hollywood simply took a real relationship and turned the volume all the way up. And that's a pattern we are going to see again and again. Number 11, Rudolph Valentino and Jane Acker. Now we go back to the silent film era. Rudolph Valentino wasn't just a movie star. He was a phenomenon. Women adored him, newspapers followed him. And his image as the mysterious romantic leading man helped create the template for the male movie idol we still recognize today. In 1919, Valentino married actress Jane Acker. The marriage became famous almost immediately for its strange beginning and extremely short honeymoon. The relationship has also been surrounded by decades of speculation concerning both stars' sexuality. Some later writers have described the marriage as a possible lavender marriage, meaning a heterosexual presenting marriage that could help conceal a person's sexual orientation in a period when being openly queer could destroy a career. But we have to be careful here. Not every claim made about Valentino and Acker has equal historical support. Some of the stories surrounding their relationship became more dramatic as Hollywood mythology grew. What we do know is that Valentino's image was enormously valuable. He represented romance, masculinity, glamour, and fantasy. Anything that threatened that image could potentially threaten his career. And that was the brutal reality of the studio era. Today, an actor can publicly discuss their private life and still maintain a successful career. Back then, the rules could be very different. Studios often used morality clauses, publicists, gossip columnists, and carefully arranged appearances to control how stars were perceived. The private person and the public character could become two completely different people. And Rudolph Valentino lived at the center of that machine. Number 10. Alla Nazimova and Charles Bryant. This is one of the more complicated stories on our list. Alla Nazimova was one of the biggest stars of the silent screen. She was glamorous, powerful, unconventional, and deeply connected to the theatrical and artistic worlds. Nazimova's marriage to actor Charles Bryant has often been described by historians as a lavender marriage. They married in 1912 and remained publicly associated for years. Behind the scenes, Nazimova had relationships with women, and her Hollywood home became famous as a gathering place for artists and performers. Her marriage to Bryant helped create a socially acceptable public image at a time when openly queer relationships could destroy a career. But the story eventually became more complicated. When Bryant married another woman in 1925, the revelation that his previous marriage to Nazimova had been questionable caused a scandal. The important thing to understand is that these arrangements were not always about simple greed or publicity. For some people, they were about survival. A successful actor could lose their career simply because the public discovered something about their private life. So when we look back at these marriages today, we should not judge them using only modern standards. Hollywood was operating under a very different set of rules, and sometimes a wedding photograph could function almost like a shield. Number 9, Judy Garland and Vincent Minnelli. Now this is where Hollywood glamour becomes heartbreaking. Judy Garland was one of the most famous performers in the world. Vincent Minnelli was a highly respected director. They met while working at MGM and eventually married in 1945. Their daughter, Liza Minnelli, would later become a legendary entertainer in her own right. From the outside, this looked like the ultimate Hollywood power couple. Two talented stars, one glamorous studio, a famous marriage, and a child who would grow up to become a star herself. But the relationship was far more complicated than the publicity photographs suggested. Later accounts and biographies have discussed Minnelli's sexuality and his relationships with men, while Garland herself became an important icon within LGBTQ culture. Some historians and writers have therefore described the Garland-Minnelli marriage as a possible lavender marriage. But again, calling it simply a fake marriage would erase the complexity of their lives. They had a child together. They shared genuine affection. They also had serious problems. Their marriage eventually ended in divorce in 1951. The important point is that Hollywood could create a public narrative that was much cleaner than real life. The cameras showed a glamorous husband and wife. Behind the cameras were two complicated human beings dealing with fame, expectations, identity, addiction, career pressure, and an industry that demanded perfection. And that is perhaps the most important theme of this entire story. The publicity machine didn't create every marriage, but it could make the public believe that every marriage was perfect. Number 8, Tyrone Power and Annabella. Tyrone Power was one of the great romantic leading men of his generation. Tall, handsome, elegant, and enormously popular, Power was exactly the kind of star Hollywood wanted audiences to dream about. He married French actress Annabella in 1939. Their relationship had obvious publicity value because both were well-known performers. They were also a perfect match for the romantic mythology Hollywood loved to sell. But their marriage was not simply a publicity arrangement. They stayed married for several years and appeared publicly together. Their relationship eventually ended, and Power went on to marry Linda Christian. What makes this story interesting is that Hollywood often blurred the line between genuine romance and commercial image building. When two stars fell in love, studios did not necessarily have to invent anything. They could simply use the relationship. Magazine covers, radio interviews, premieres, public appearances, photographs, fan magazines. Every appearance reinforced the idea that the audience wasn't just watching the stars on screen. They were watching their lives. And that idea was incredibly profitable. Number 7, Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. Now this one is almost too famous to need an introduction. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton met while filming Cleopatra. Their chemistry became legendary. Both were already married when their relationship began attracting enormous attention. The affair became an international scandal, and then came the marriage. Taylor and Burton married in Montreal. Suddenly, the couple known around the world as Liz and Dick became one of the biggest celebrity stories on earth. Was it a publicity marriage? No credible evidence proves that they married simply to promote Cleopatra. In fact, their relationship was famously turbulent, passionate, and deeply personal. They divorced in 1974, then married again in 1975, before divorcing again. But here's why they belong in a discussion about publicity. Hollywood did not need to manufacture this story. The real-life drama was already bigger than most movie plots. The media followed every argument, every vacation, every expensive gift, every separation, and every reunion. The couple became a global entertainment story. Their marriage itself became a kind of continuing movie. And that tells us something fascinating about celebrity culture. Sometimes publicity doesn't create the romance. The romance creates the publicity. Taylor and Burton were living proof of that. Number 6. Joan Crawford and Douglas Fairbanks Jr. Joan Crawford was one of Hollywood's most ambitious stars. She understood image better than almost anyone. Crawford's career depended not only on her acting, but also on her carefully constructed persona. She married Douglas Fairbanks Jr. in 1929. He was handsome, young, wealthy, and connected to one of America's most famous entertainment families. To Hollywood audiences, the pairing looked almost too perfect. A glamorous actress and a glamorous young actor. They were photographed together, appeared at social events, and became one of the era's fashionable celebrity couples. But the marriage eventually ended in divorce. Crawford later had several other marriages and relationships. Her career, however, continued to evolve. The Crawford story reminds us that Hollywood publicity wasn't necessarily a secret conspiracy. It was an ecosystem. Stars understood that attention mattered. Studios understood that attention mattered. Magazines understood that attention mattered, and audiences wanted stories. Put all four together, and you get the celebrity culture that still exists today. The difference is that today's publicity machine is social media. In Crawford's era, it was fan magazines, newspaper columns, radio programs, studio photographers, and carefully managed interviews. The technology changed. The basic business model didn't. Number 5, Jean Harlow and Paul Byrne. Jean Harlow was one of the brightest stars of early Hollywood. She was young, glamorous, provocative, and enormously marketable. In 1932, she married MGM producer Paul Byrne. The marriage attracted huge attention. Harlow was one of the studio's biggest attractions, while Burton was an important figure behind the scenes. But their marriage quickly became surrounded by tragedy and mystery. Only 2 months after their wedding, Burton was found dead. His death was ruled a suicide, but the circumstances have remained the subject of discussion and speculation for decades. This is one story where it would be irresponsible to claim that the marriage was simply arranged for publicity. There is no reliable evidence establishing that. Instead, the tragedy shows the darker side of celebrity culture. The public wanted explanations. Newspapers wanted headlines. Hollywood wanted to protect its stars, and rumors multiplied. The Harlow-Burton marriage demonstrates how quickly a glamorous celebrity wedding could become a national obsession. And once a story became famous, it could remain famous for generations. Number 4, Marilyn Monroe and Arthur Miller. At first glance, this seems like an unlikely Hollywood marriage. Marilyn Monroe was one of the most famous movie stars on earth. Arthur Miller was one of America's most respected playwrights. They married in 1956. Unlike some of the other relationships on this list, there is no serious reason to claim that their marriage was simply a studio publicity stunt. In fact, Miller was not the kind of Hollywood leading man who would conveniently fit Monroe's manufactured screen image. Their marriage was complicated and eventually ended in divorce. But the public fascination was enormous. Marilyn Monroe was already a global symbol. Anything she did became news. Who she dated, where she went, what she wore, who she married. Every detail became part of her mythology. And that is where the concept of publicity becomes important. A famous person doesn't have to intentionally seek publicity for their private life to become public property. Sometimes the machine simply follows them. Marilyn's marriage to Miller became another chapter in the story audiences wanted to understand. Was she happy? Was she lonely? Was she changing? Could she escape the image that Hollywood had created for her? Those questions made the marriage fascinating to millions. Number 3, Clark Gable and Carole Lombard. Now we reach one of Hollywood's most beloved couples. Clark Gable was the king of Hollywood. Carole Lombard was one of the most talented and charismatic actresses of her generation. They married in 1939. Unlike many celebrity relationships, their story is remembered less as a publicity stunt and more as a genuine love story. But they were both enormous stars, so their marriage naturally attracted attention. Gable and Lombard had worked in the same industry, and their relationship became a favorite subject for the public. The tragic ending made their story even more legendary. In 1942, Lombard died in a plane crash while returning from a war bomb tour. Gable was devastated. He later served in the US Army Air Forces during World War II. The tragedy transformed their marriage into Hollywood legend. This is a perfect example of why we should be careful with the phrase, married for publicity. Celebrity marriages were often public. They were often photographed. They were often promoted. But that doesn't mean the relationship itself was fake. Sometimes the cameras simply happened to be pointed at two people who genuinely loved each other. Number 2, Rock Hudson and Phyllis Gates. Now we arrive at perhaps the clearest and most famous example of a Hollywood marriage being connected to image management. Rock Hudson was one of the biggest male stars of the 1950s. He was handsome, charming, masculine, and marketed as a romantic hero. But behind the public image, Hudson was a gay man living in an era when being openly gay could destroy a Hollywood career. His agent, Henry Wilson, was known for managing the images of his clients. In 1955, Hudson married Phyllis Gates, who worked as his agent's secretary. The marriage lasted roughly 3 years. Gates later insisted that she believed the relationship was genuine. That detail matters, because when we describe this as a publicity marriage, we should not automatically assume that both people entered it with the same understanding. The social pressure of the era was enormous. Hollywood studios had morality clauses. Publicists controlled stories. Magazines followed stars constantly, and rumors about an actor's sexuality could become dangerous. Hudson's marriage to Gates helped reinforce the image of the heterosexual romantic leading man that Hollywood was selling. But behind that image was a human being trying to survive in an industry that demanded he hide a major part of himself. That is why the story of Rock Hudson is not just about publicity. It is about fear. It is about career pressure. It is about discrimination. And it is about the enormous personal cost of maintaining a public image. Hudson continued working successfully for decades, but the secret he carried followed him throughout his career. Eventually, in the 1980s, the AIDS crisis changed the public conversation around Hudson forever. His life remains one of the clearest examples of how Hollywood's obsession with image could have real consequences for real people. And now, number one. Number one, the Hollywood marriage that proves the line between romance and publicity was never as simple as we think. Rita Hayworth and Orson Welles. Rita Hayworth was one of Hollywood's greatest screen icons. She was glamorous, talented, and one of the most photographed women of her generation. Orson Welles was a celebrated actor, director, and writer. The two married in 1943. Their relationship was highly publicized because both were major entertainment figures. Hayworth was already a star, and Welles was one of the most famous creative personalities in America. But was their marriage created for publicity? There is no convincing evidence that it was simply a publicity stunt. They had a daughter together, Rebecca. Their marriage eventually ended in divorce. Yet their relationship shows how Hollywood could turn two famous people into a single celebrity story. When stars married, newspapers gained a narrative. Studios gained attention. Fans gained something to dream about. And the couple gained another layer of fame. But there is a bigger truth hiding behind all 12 stories. The old Hollywood system was not just selling movies. It was selling fantasy. It sold the idea that movie stars lived perfect lives, perfect houses, perfect clothes, perfect romances, perfect marriages, and sometimes, when reality didn't match the fantasy, the industry tried to repair the image. A star could be linked to the right person. A romance could be encouraged. A breakup could be managed. A marriage could become part of the publicity campaign. And in the most extreme cases, a private life could be almost completely rewritten for public consumption. But we should never make the mistake of assuming every Hollywood marriage was fake. That's simply not supported by history. Some couples genuinely loved each other. Some relationships were complicated. Some were strategic. Some were possibly arranged to protect careers. And some remain mysteries. The most fascinating part is that the public often couldn't tell the difference. Imagine being a fan in 1945. You open a magazine. You see a photograph of two beautiful stars. They're smiling. They're holding hands. The caption says they're in love. You have no social media, no behind-the-scenes interviews, no leaked text messages, no podcasts. No documentary exposing the studio system. You simply believe the picture, and Hollywood understood that. The photograph was powerful. The headline was powerful. The wedding announcement was powerful. The celebrity couple became a product, and the audience bought it. In some cases, the stars themselves understood the game. In others, they were trapped inside it. And in the most tragic cases, Maintaining the public image came at an enormous personal cost. That's why these stories shouldn't simply be treated as funny Hollywood scandals. They tell us something much bigger about fame. They show us what happens when an industry becomes powerful enough to influence not only what people see on screen, but what they believe about the people behind the screen. And perhaps the most surprising thing is that the system didn't completely disappear. Hollywood has changed. The studio system isn't what it was. Stars have more control over their personal brands. Social media allows celebrities to speak directly to audiences. But celebrity relationships are still used to generate attention. Romances still dominate headlines. Movie premieres still create dating rumors. Fans still analyze photographs, and people still ask the same question: is this real? Or is this publicity? Maybe that is why these old stories continue to fascinate us. Because underneath the glamorous photographs is a question that never really gets old. How much of a celebrity's life belongs to the celebrity, and how much belongs to the audience? So if you enjoyed this journey behind the curtain of old Hollywood, don't just remember the glamorous weddings. Remember the people behind them. Some were chasing love. Some were protecting careers. Some were trying to survive. Some were caught between private truth and public expectation. And some simply fell in love while the cameras happened to be watching. That is the real secret of old Hollywood. Not every marriage was a publicity stunt. The real trick was making the public believe that the Hollywood dream was always real. And sometimes it was. If this story surprised you, hit the like button because it helps the channel more than you might think. Share this video with someone who loves classic Hollywood, forgotten celebrity stories, and the secrets behind the golden age of cinema. And if you want more stories about the hidden side of Hollywood, the marriages, scandals, rivalries, secrets, and moments the old studio publicity machines tried to keep out of sight, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because the next story might reveal an entirely different side of the stars you thought you knew. Thanks for watching, and remember, behind every perfect Hollywood photograph, there was a story the camera didn't show.